welcome once again to the live and mildly cloudy corner of the Glenwood and Lunt, which is really a quite transformed corner of Glenwood and Lunt, but I'm going to let those of you who are curious about that come and see for yourself. The Heartland Cafe has been rehabbed, refurbished, painted up, and changed this week. So I really invite you to come and take a look for yourself. It's an ongoing process, but pretty exciting. So I can't waste time with chitter chatter. I will make announcements later, but our first guest, Tom Geoghegan. Hello and welcome back to the Live from the Heartland, Tom.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, we have to because you're such a player, dude. You're such a player in this big story here in Chicago. For those of you who are used to the show, know what's going on, we've kept track of the Chicago school system, the public school drama of this year, and we have our friend Tom Geoghegan, who is, well, you're many things, Tom. You're also a labor lawyer. How would you self-describe in 6 words or less in terms of the work you do? Because you do a lot of different work.
We have a small firm which carries on, founded by Mr. Leon Dupre, the longtime leader of the independent aldermen and the
who
city
we were
council.
Fortunate enough to interview on this show some years back.
And the firm founded by Mr. Dupre tries to carry on the kind of work that he did. For working people, we do a lot of civil rights, we do a lot of labor, and miscellaneous cases.
Miscellaneous cases. Well, yes, folks, he is a soft-spoken angel of good works, one of those kind of guys, so we're going to pull it out of him. You are involved right now in 2 pretty essential and could be earth-shaking kind of suits. The first, I think in chronological order, the first one was the suit to overturn the Chicago ward map.
Yes.
All right.
We're representing the League of Women Voters in a challenge to the ward map that's going to go into effect in 2015, and we're challenging the authority of the aldermen to put new aldermen in place now and change the identity of the aldermen representing tens of thousands of Chicagoans. And we're challenging the map itself for deviating from the principle of one person, one vote. And we're seeking a preliminary injunction right now in federal court to stop the implementation of the map during the terms of the aldermen who were elected to represent people in specific wards and who should not be changing their identity without the consent of the voters.
Exactly. Well, for example, we had Alderman Fioretti on the show not that long ago, and he's one of the people who apparently winds up without a ward at the end of the remap.
Yes, well,
without
he
his
himself
ward.
Is not in his own ward anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I've paid attention a lot of years to the map drawing that happens here, and when you say the grounds are that it does in fact mess with one person, one vote. I mean, it seems like they've been doing that for a long time with the ward remap process.
Not quite as bad as this time. So there's a 10% population deviation. Lincoln Park, the 43rd ward, has 57,000 people. The 5th ward in Hyde Park has 51,000. What is the rationale for these big population deviations?
Yes.
And the rationale, as we point out in our case, the rationale is given by Pat O'Connor, the floor leader of the ordinance, who said, this is what we had to do to get 41 votes. 41 votes were the key because had the ordinance not had 41 aldermen behind it, the whole issue would have gone to the voters to decide redistricting.
Which is where it might best be stationed.
Yes.
Well, I recall, and I don't know if you were around or in on this, but the great West Side activist Richard Barnett.
Yes.
and recall our dear departed Bill O'Brien. The two of those guys, some 20 years ago or so, logged in a lot of computer time in the state of Illinois computers, drawing a fair ward map, a straight and contiguous line-bearing ward map that did not care about supermajorities racially in each ward. In other words, left it so that the voter might be looking at 2 or 3 different candidates of 2 or 3 different races and have to choose actually the best one for them, regardless of race. I mean, it was a highly enlightened approach to the breaking up the city, and it also honored neighborhood lines instead of this craziness that you see on our map. Did you ever cross paths with that map by any chance, or
no,
or hear about it?
But there are 3 obligations under the law for ward maps. Number 1 is the wards have to be divided equally by population.
Yes.
And in the current map, they aren't.
Now,
Number 2, the wards have to be compact. In the current map, they're so far away from being compact as to be laughable. I mean, people in the 36th ward have T-shirts now that show the map of the 36th ward, which is hilariously elongated and loop-like and spaghetti-like.
Yeah. Looks like a giant colon, doesn't it?
And number 3, they're supposed to be contiguous. In other words, you can't have a ward in one part of town, half a ward in one part of town, half a ward in another part of town. And this map is actually not even contiguous. At least it's an arguable point. There's a quarter of a mile sort of alley that connects, part of the second ward with another part of the second ward. But in addition to that, Katie, these ward boundaries ought to comply with the Voting Rights Act. They shouldn't dilute minority voting strength. And the City Council rejected 2 maps, one from the South Side NAACP and one from MOLDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, which would have divided all 50 wards equally by population and preserved the same number of majority African American and majority Latino wards. And in fact, the NAACP map would have had even more. And that was the one map that had the most equal division of population. But those were rejected. And
so,
neighborhoods aren't kept together. The back of the wards has got 3 or 4 different wards in it, and West Town is divided up.
I hunger and thirst for the voters to get their hands on this process. So, will your suit, will it make it through on time? And maybe that's moot, given where the courts that you have to sit, that you have to present your case in front of. Or will this suit make a difference, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I never ask anybody to bet on the outcome of a lawsuit, but having said that, that's a general point. We have the League of Women Voters behind us. We have citizens from all over the city behind us, and we have a good case on the facts and the law. And we're in the federal courts. Yes, our chances of prevailing, I think, are very good. We're right on the facts and the law. That's the main thing.
So go man go is what I want to say.
Thank you.
Really, Godspeed. Well,
there is a website, I believe, that's set up called www.scrapthemap.
Scrap the map.
And that's set up by people who are concerned about this and want to fight back. And
so it's www.scrapthemap.com?
Yes, you'll find out more about the lawsuit and what the issues are in the case.
Oh, that is great. We're talking with Tom Geoghegan here, who has brought a couple of very important suits that every Cook County and Chicago voter should know about. This first one that we were just talking about was the federal suit to overturn the current Chicago ward map. The other piece of that, briefly, is that they want to put it into effect too soon, right? I mean, there was that aspect to it as well.
In 2011, the voters in the city elected aldermen from specific ward boundaries. The aldermen, in their wisdom, decided to change who they represent.
Yeah.
And
midstream.
In federal court, the city of Chicago, the defendant in the case, has been arguing, well, it doesn't really matter who your alderman is because they represent all the citizens of Chicago. And the response to that, I think, is that if they represent all the aldermen, all the people of Chicago, why didn't the people of Chicago get to elect all the aldermen?
Yeah.
You know, there are specific ward boundaries for that purpose.
Yeah, thanks. Plus, you know, well, we won't even go into all the various ways that the aldermen see themselves as mini mayors of their many towns, their wards, and argue for no one to mess with what goes on within the boundaries of their ward. Yeah. Well, I really, again, Godspeed. I want to keep track of that, and I want to support that lawsuit all the way. We also saw yet another chapter, a huge chapter in the school closure process happened this week. Very moving, very attended by parents, school children, and of course the teachers. The meeting downtown where the unelected Board of Education in Chicago voted to approve the closures put forth by the superintendent and the rest of the board.
Yes.
Now, you've got a lawsuit that basically, tell us what the lawsuit says that you're bringing against CPS.
On behalf of parents from all over the city, we filed a lawsuit to stop the closings. We filed 2 days before the board approved all the closings, except the 4 that Barbara Burt Bennett withdrew. We filed a motion for preliminary injunction. The motion for preliminary injunction will be heard in mid-July.
Will be heard in
mid-July.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the point I want to emphasize is that the federal court will have the last say in whether or not the school closings occur. It's not over in the view of the parents.
And now the timing of all of this, it seems to be, and I've seen some writing that says it's on purpose that they're making this decision in May to close schools for September, not allowing for there to be organizing across a school year. And if your suit doesn't get heard until July, pushes it back even further, the injunction is not keeping things from going forward as far as school closings go right now. Is that the case?
That's correct.
Uh-huh. So this is going to be a giant, mess.
Well, again, I think we're right on the facts and we're the law, and we expect to prevail.
So the lawsuit itself claims that specifically the special ed students will disproportionately be hurt by the closings.
Well, there are 2 claims. First, there's a claim under the Americans with Disability Act that the closings are discriminatory against children with special needs, special education children, because these closings on the rush timetable that is occurring,
right,
and even on a slower timetable, will cause more harm to those children than to non-disabled children, so it's discriminatory. And second, that given that discrimination, the board has a duty to provide a reasonable accommodation to those children, and a reasonable accommodation under all the circumstances here is to leave the children where they are. That's the ADA claim. That's a federal statutory claim, and that's the basis of the federal court's jurisdiction over the case. But there's an additional claim under the Illinois Civil Rights Act, and some of your listeners may know that a state law claim can be heard if it's part of a federal claim or connected to a federal claim. And the state law claim is that the closings have, since 2001, have selected schools under different criteria. The criteria change through this period. Select schools for closings that are all black, that over 90% of the children of schools that have been closed up to 2013 have been African American, although black children are only 42% of all the children in the public schools generally.
That's a key factor that people do not know.
Right. They're almost 100% of the kids who go through these traumatic events, but they're less than half of the children in the public schools. And that, the use of shifting criteria, the board contends it is only using neutral criteria, but it keeps coming up with neutral criteria that only make the children, the African American children of the city, bear the brunt of whatever, really, of things like charter school expansion,
right,
of budget cutting measures.
Yeah.
Our claim in this case is that has the effect of subjecting these children to discrimination because of race, whether the board is acting intentionally or not,
right,
and that it should stop.
You know, you're fighting the battle that, so often is the court of last resort, literally, for real social issues like this one. The school closing debate has been raging for 6 months or so, ever since the first list came out, maybe longer than that. But you and your band of hardworking lawyers are really our court of last resort. How do you support yourself doing such important and to the point suits like this? How do you raise money for that? You have to raise money, right, to bring these suits about?
Yes, and we've never been successful at that. Occasionally it's crossed our minds over the years to go out and ask people to contribute to these cases, and it puzzles me because I ran for Congress, and
talk about dialing for dollars, huh?
Well, Katie, it was really easy to raise money, and and Democrats open their pocketbooks and take out their Visa cards and support candidates of their choice, from the far left to the middle left to the center right or whatever in the Democratic Party, and of course in the Republican Party too. People just pay money. The amount of money that was spent in that primary is stunning to me.
Right.
And it was only, even though I ran, it was only to elect another Democrat.
Right.
So
right.
Why is it that people contribute to that, I've often wondered, but won't contribute to cases, challenging redistricting, other cases where the money could really make a huge difference and you could change things structurally in the country in a far greater way.
So how far have you gone in answering your own question there?
I don't know the answer to that.
But isn't it, I would think
it's
a couple of things are kind of obvious. One, it's not sexy. Elections, you can argue, are not sexy, but at least people know about them. What we're talking about here is stuff that should be being talked about on the news, but is not necessarily until you get on to talk about the CPS lawsuit, to talk about the federal suit to overturn the city ward remap. It's not on the front burner, and people assume, I bet, that legal folks have their own cash to run these things.
That's correct.
Is that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
So you need to.
Whereas multimillionaires who run for office are assumed to be needy people, and it's a puzzle.
It is a puzzle. It is a puzzle. So we need to throw a benefit for these suits here.
I'm all for that.
Because we threw a benefit earlier this week for the local Democratic Party, and people seem to, respond to that, which was nice, and we want to thank them.
But seriously, to get an expert witness in a case like this, which in some of these cases, which are it's crucial to the outcome of cases that could really result in huge changes. It takes $20,000, but $20,000 is nothing compared to what goes on in sort of a primary election around here for even aldermen.
I know.
but it is almost impossible to raise that money for a lawsuit.
Okay, so where do people go? We did give them a website for Scrap the Map, the www.scrapthemap.com. Is there another website that that people could go to for the CPS lawsuit?
No.
No? All right,
Not that I know of.
So just your own website, which is, go ahead and tell us, Tom.
Our website is Dupre, Schwartz, and Geoghegan. You can Google it and hit it, and it's.
I was on a personal website of yours last night. Was I not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one. It's to sell books that I wrote. Somewhat against my better judgment, a friend of mine set it up because he said, "People want to buy your book." It's
sure. Why would you want to be, successful at that? Duh. Us leftists.
I should thank him. It's a very good website.
It is, actually.
I didn't have anything to do with it.
So I want to know about the book that is currently for sale on your website, which is interesting. Were You Born on the Wrong Continent? Which subtitle, How the European Model Can Help You Get a Life. First of all, what's with that title? Won't that tick people off who, think of themselves as already having a life? There's that.
Yes.
But go ahead, talk to us about that book a bit.
Well, the book comes, it's an attempt to explain to Americans what life in a European social democracy would be like. And
you mean with health care and stuff like that?
And time off.
Yeah. Like 6 weeks a year.
Yeah. So,
minimum. Paid.
And I also try to explain why it is that Germany's been so globally competitive, even though it has such high wage rates. So why is that? And the book tries to explain why high-wage unionized countries do better globally than low-wage or flexible-wage non-union countries, at least in terms of trade balances, and protecting the middle class and having an industrial base. Why is it that the higher wage countries do better than the lower wage countries, or at least the higher wage unionized countries do better than the lower wage countries?
So how long did you work on putting this book together, and how much time did you spend in Europe in order to do that?
I spent too much time and not enough time working on the book. It took me years to write it because I'm an American and I spend all my time at the office, so I'm not going over to Europe. And on the other hand, I didn't spend enough time in Europe. I'm so sorry I finished the book because it was a great excuse to go to Europe all the time. I'd say, well, I have to finish the book. I have to go over to Frankfurt or Berlin and interview somebody.
Yeah.
It's also a wonderful thing to be doing when you're traveling, to have an excuse to call up somebody who you don't know in a foreign country and say, could you have lunch with me and explain to me how X or Y or Z works?
How did you get the initial spark to do this? What came together for you that one day that said, oh yeah, this is the book I need to write for my fellow Americans?
It was when I was in the laundromat on a Saturday in Chicago, and I was reading the New York Times, and because I was at the laundromat, I was flipping, and it was Saturday, I was reading stories in the back that I normally don't read, and there was a story about the Treaty of Maastricht. This was 1992. And about the rift between Helmut Kohl, who was the right-of-center German chancellor, and John Major, who succeeded Thatcher as British Prime Minister.
Right.
And the rift was, Kohl was insisting that the British accept a provision in the treaty that would require EU-wide companies operating on an EU-wide basis to consult their workers about basic decisions affecting the firm. And as I was reading this story, I thought, what? Here is the pro-business party person in Germany who's pounding on Major to accept a provision that companies, all companies, have consult workers have some sort of representation arrangement to get their input about, quote, basic decisions affecting the firm. Something that in their wildest dreams, no Democrat on the left, and I'm talking about people who read The Nation, would even propose as... and it hit me that if I'm a union-side labor lawyer in the United States, this country like Germany ought to be, this ought to be what I want. So I wanted to go over and see how the labor world was set up there and what the role of working people was. And I'm not trying to idealize Germany. There are lots of problems there and so on and so forth.
Right.
But as a German said to me the other day, yes, there are this and that and there are that. He said, but at the end of it he said, we can still look them in the eye. And it is different because you have globally, or let's put it this way, it's impossible to imagine somebody with a high school education being on the board of directors of one of the biggest global corporations in America. But not only is it possible to imagine it in Germany, it happens. You have the biggest companies are made up of people elected by their fellow workers, a number of whom have never been to a university.
Wow.
But they're sitting on the board of directors of these companies.
Based on the fact that they work for them and...
Well, based on the fact that they have co-determination and works councils and things that are just, beyond our imagination.
It's appalling. It's stunning.
And that's why those companies stay in business. They stay in business because there's this kind of reciprocity between management and working people to keep the joint going, so to speak.
Exactly.
Instead of disassembling it and moving it to the south and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you only do important things, huh? Do you ever just, lighten up, take a break, do something goofy?
Every day.
That up, baby. That's what I'm glad to hear. Well, Tom, I think we do need to do some supportive work here at the Heartland for your lawsuits and help them stay alive. I mean, a lot of folks weren't around when lawsuits were the final push that brought civil rights into a lot of different areas of our lives, and you could be helping us all to actual representation that's been missing in City Council for a lot of people. There was one other question, and I think I lost it. What's one thing you'd like folks to know before we let you off to go down and do the work you need to do on the South Side?
The one thing I'd like...
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, you saw the president's talk this week, the hour-long presentation he gave on national security?
I read about it.
Did you think it was history-making?
I think that we struggle with the war power issue, and it's enormously messy, and we haven't figured out the legal framework for this yet.
Right.
It's not as simple as asking Congress to control everything, and it's unacceptable to leave it entirely in the hands of the executive. And I think that ultimately what we have to work for and to realize is that the solution to the war power issue can't be worked out within the context of the United States Constitution.
Very good.
It has to be worked out in a kind of international law framework.
Yeah.
And until we think in that bigger term, focusing on things like the War Powers Act, I think are dead ends. So. Well,
okay. Tom Geoghegan, who has filed suit to overturn the Chicago word map, who has also joined in a suit for suing the CPS for the timing of closures and the American Disabilities Act. I don't know how to say that. I said it in the wrong direction, but for flaunting the ADA Act and
the Illinois Civil Rights Act.
And the Illinois Civil Rights Act. So best to you in
Thank
this
you, Katie.
struggle, and know that you represent, you carry a lot of us with you.
Well, thank you very much. Keep the Heartland going here and keep up the fight.
Well, all right. You are listening to Live from the Heartland, and we are here every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. on WLUW 88.7 FM. We will be taking a short musical break and be back with the cultural side of our show with Women in Blues, specifically Holly the Maxwell. Very exciting. So stay right there and come back.
I want you to remember Ike Turner.